basically took raw wool, and you can card it either with your fingers, like this, just fluffing it out, or with actual carders. But you want to fluff it out so that the fibers are pretty separated, there's no bits of poop or straw mixed in there. Make sure there's no condensed pieces of wool. And so you fluff it out so it looks like this. And then to get it to look like a mat, you want to lay it down in a very even layer. You kind of, square by square, kind of fill it out so that the edges are kind of intermingled, so that when you start patting it down, they have other pieces of wool to grab onto. And so you're basically building up this whole square, whatever you're making. And then you can do 2 layers or 3 layers or 4, depending on how thick you want your piece of felt to be. But you always want to do it layer by layer. Okay.
So prior to it being carded, what do we do with the wool? We wash it first?
You do want to wash it. You want to get the lanolin out. The lanolin is what keeps it from felting together. And you want to wash it just so it's clean.
Once, twice, 3 times, as many times?
As many times as you prefer. I at least do it a couple times. Once or twice is best. But more than that is also good.
And in the drying, before it gets carded, do you just let it dry, or do you put it in the dryer?
We let it dry, out in the air, and air dry it. If you store it wet, over time it will rot pretty easily, so you want to make sure if you're storing it, you keep it nice and dry. And then once you have it laid out like this, then you wet it down with a spray bottle or with just water, and kind of saturate it and make sure it's nice and flat, and then you can start rubbing soap onto it, and so you're patting, and then you're kind of gently rubbing it, and you don't want to move the wool around, or else it will kind of get all messed up, and there'll be like bare spots or uneven places. And you just have over and over and over again until you get a piece of felted mat. The edges, you want to make sure you focus on them, because they will come out a little wonky. It's hard to get like a very straight edge, but you can easily trim it out. You're trying to get it as even as possible, and you usually do a couple layers. But
How thick do you want a first layer?
This is if you feel this is ideal. Here. I'm taking like a patch like this big, I'm just
Tuck it in.
putting it down, kind of square by square, and kind of mixing it in with the sides. If there's like any thin spots, you can take a little bit and put it over that. You want it really fluffed out like this. So that makes sense.
Can you go back just opposite?
Yeah, just fluff it out like that. So now, next step is wetting it down. You can just do this with like a cup, but this makes it, this is more even.
A little more control.
Yeah. And it's also good too if you have like soap in here. You can put a little soap.
Okay. Now, what kind of soap are you using? Like a Castile soap, there's nothing to it? Like,
Yeah,
That's what
it's
that
just
is. It's
simple.
all natural.
Pretty pure soap. Alright, now we're going to get it all soapy. So the 2 movements that you're doing is you're patting it like this, and then you're rubbing it like this, very gently, so just like it's barely brushing your hand, but you're just agitating the fibers together so they're basically knotting up.
What's this?
And
Water?
yeah, it's just water. And you want to try and do it like pretty evenly. So you don't want to focus on one spot for too long, because if you really felt this one spot and everything else is left unfelted, it might, not really felt together that well on the edges. So you want to do it, pretty evenly. Patting is better at first, just because you don't want to be like moving the wool around. So you want to be pretty gentle. So you really don't want the wool to move at all. So I usually pat first, because it helps at least agitate it a little bit together. And then you get a lot of soap in your hands and you can rub it around. So you don't want it to move, basically.
Right.
It's sketchy to just try and pick it up and do that.
Salt, yeah.
Nope. They're rigid.
Very straight edge, but you can easily trim them up. And you also want to be aware that when you're felting, it shrinks quite a lot. Like if you're making a mitten pattern, you always want to do it like 1 inch farther out than your hands, just because it will shrink about that much when you're doing it. And for like a hat, it's about the same, a little bit more. So you want to take that into consideration. You can always look up.
Once you've made a piece of felt, and once you've cut it, if you have excess that's been left over, can you go back, pull it apart, and refelt it?
Usually you can't felt onto something that's already felted. Like the skirts is like a felted skirt, and I couldn't really felt a piece on by hand because this is already felted down, so there's nothing for it to really grab onto. But you can needle felt it on pretty easily.
Okay.
But like on there, when you're felting, little bits will get kind of stuck up and they get matted, so you can't really felt them on. So they'll just kind of be like little slabs until you cut it off or needle felt it on. Because they need something to grab onto, so if it gets too felted, you can't really felt it together.
Now that we've done that and we've patted it and put it down into place, do we just let it dry?
Well, we're gonna have to pat it and do a little bit more. And then you can roll it up and squeeze it out, and roll it back out, and then pat a little bit more, and then roll it up and squeeze it, and pat a little bit more.
So basically, it does have to dry out, though, right?
Well, you can pick it up. Like when I was doing this one, this is kind of the edges are really crappy, but I was doing this in the bathtub, and it was, once it like really felted in place, I could pick it up and kind of squeeze it out like this.
Right.
Because once it is felted, whether it's wet or not, you should still be able to kind of be a little rough with it as long as it's like actually felted. So you can wring it out and then dry it by the stove or hang it up or something. So it doesn't need to dry flat, but you do. Well, I guess it does need to dry flat because if you dry it like over a pot or something, it's going to take on the shape
of the pot.
Yeah. So.